I've always been a planner. The kind of woman who keeps color-coded calendars, sets reminders for reminders, and throws dinner parties with custom name cards just because. So when I decided to organize Daniel's surprise birthday party, it wasn't going to be some last-minute pizza and beer night. No. I booked a stunning venue with skyline views, hired a caterer who knew the difference between rustic and refined, and handpicked every song for the playlist. On the surface, it looked like I was pouring all my love into this night. And maybe, in a twisted way, I was. But love isn't what this night is about. Every detail mattered. I made sure the candles would hit the white tablecloths just right. I told the florist I wanted roses, deep red, like blood. Dramatic? Maybe. But this wasn't going to be just any birthday. While the bartender planned his signature cocktails, I was finalizing something far more important: the guest list. It had to be curated. Exclusive. One might even say, intimate. After all, the people I was inviting had something very personal in common, and none of them knew it yet. You see, a few weeks ago, I found out the truth. About Daniel. About all of them. The late nights. The work trips. The sudden change in his passcode. At first, I thought I was going crazy, doubting myself, second-guessing everything. But then I found the messages, the photos, the receipts. And instead of falling apart, I felt something else rise in me. Cold, focused, powerful. This wasn't going to be a breakdown. This was going to be a reckoning. I started collecting names like puzzle pieces. One by one, the picture became clearer. Different faces, different cities, the same lies. Some of them posted cute selfies he'd liked. Some had flirty texts backed up in old chat threads. He was careful, but not that careful. And once I started digging, the truth unraveled fast. It didn't make me cry. Not anymore. It made me meticulous. Each name I found felt like a match I was striking. This wasn't a party. It was a fuse. I remember sitting on the floor, surrounded by candles and envelopes, thinking, what do I wear to my own revenge? A dress that said elegance, not rage. A shade of lipstick that matched the wine. Everything had to be subtle, elevated, even the sabotage. I wanted him to walk into beauty before realizing it was a trap. There's something poetic about that. Letting him breathe in the roses before they show their thorns. Because I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to host. Planning it gave me purpose. While he sent goodnight texts from hotel beds that weren't his, I was building my moment. While he lied to my face with that lazy smile, I was smiling back, knowing exactly what I'd do. And the best part? He had no idea. He thought I was organizing a party to celebrate his life. But really, I was curating the perfect stage for the truth to walk in. And oh, the truth was about to be breathtaking. I kept thinking about the look on his face, that split-second flicker when charm turns to panic, when all the pretty lies catch up at once. I wasn't doing this just for me. I was doing it for every woman he fooled, every story he twisted, every moment he made someone doubt their worth. I knew it would be messy, awkward, maybe even chaotic, but it would be honest. And I was tired of pretending everything was fine just to protect a man who lied as easily as he breathed. Some people would say this is petty, that I should have just walked away, packed up my dignity and moved on. But what they don't understand is that silence can feel like erasure. And I refuse to disappear quietly from my own story. I've spent years being the good girlfriend, the supportive one, the woman who forgives, excuses, makes space for bad behavior, and calls it love. That version of me, she's gone, the woman I'm becoming. She sets the table, lights the candles, and invites the truth in. And so I double-checked the playlist one last time, poured myself a glass of wine, looked at the guest list taped to my fridge like a war map. The plan was in motion. The pieces were set. And the night that Daniel thought was all about him It was already mine. What he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that this wasn't the kind of party anyone would forget. I didn't want drama. I wanted clarity. So I started with the first name on the list, a woman I'd never met, but whose messages to Daniel had enough heart emojis to make me sick. I stared at her profile photo for a long time before hitting send. No threats, no accusations. Just a quiet invitation. You've been lied to. Come to his surprise party if you want the truth. I didn't expect her to respond, but within minutes, she replied. 3 words. I'll be there. One by one, I reached out to the others. Each message felt like dropping a pebble into still water, unpredictable ripples. Some of them were confused, some defensive. A few were heartbreakingly kind, like they were waiting for someone to validate the gut feeling they'd buried. I never gave names or details, just that one sentence, and I never begged. If they came, they came. If they didn't, the show would go on. But deep down, I hoped they would. Not for revenge, at least not entirely. For solidarity. The responses trickled in slowly, like soft knocks on a door I wasn't sure I wanted opened. But I kept answering. Some women asked questions I couldn't answer. How long? Did he love you? One even asked, Are we really doing this? I told her, Only if you're ready. Because this wasn't about humiliation. It was about truth. And some truths are too heavy to carry alone. So I gave them a choice. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone either. Some of the women were furious. At him, at themselves, at me. I understood. Betrayal has a way of staining everything, even the messenger. One called me at midnight, voice trembling, asking if I was sure. Yes, I whispered, sitting alone on my kitchen floor, staring at a man's shoes by my door that no longer meant anything. I'm sure. That moment, 2 strangers, united by the same lie, felt heavier than I expected. Like finding pieces of yourself in someone else's heartbreak. Others were curious, like they needed to see it for themselves, just to believe it. One woman said, If he lied to me, I want to look him in the eyes when he sees the truth walk in. I respected that. We weren't plotting revenge. We were reclaiming our voices, each in our own way. I gave them the details gently, time, location, dress code. And one very important rule, say nothing until I say it's time. Not to be dramatic, but I needed control. I needed that moment to be mine. And somehow, they listened. Not all of them said yes, but more than I expected did. I imagined them getting ready on that night, putting on lipstick, fixing their hair, holding the invitation in one hand and 1,000 questions in the other. They didn't know each other. They barely knew me. But they knew what it felt like to be lied to by someone who swore he was different. And that was enough. Enough to say yes. Enough to show up. There was one woman I almost didn't invite. Something about her photos made my chest tighten. She looked happy. The kind of happy I used to be, before the suspicion, before the double-checking, before the lies made me question my own reflection. I hesitated with her. Maybe because I could see myself in her, naive, trusting, unaware. But I sent the message anyway. A few hours later, she replied with just one word. Finally. And something in me exhaled. I wasn't sure how many would actually show up. Would they believe me? Would they chicken out at the last second? Would they sit at the bar, silently watching each other, wondering who was who? The truth is, I didn't know. But I wasn't organizing a protest. I was setting a stage. If even one of them showed up, it would be enough. Enough to prove I wasn't alone in this twisted web. Enough to make him face what he'd built with his own selfish hands. As the day approached, I felt the tension rise in my chest like a storm warning. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about all the women who've ever been told to calm down, to not overthink it, to trust him. I thought about them, about us, and I knew. This wasn't just an invitation, it was a reckoning. And the most beautiful part? He still had no idea. The night had finally arrived. I stood in the center of the venue, a soft, amber-lit space with high ceilings and polished wood floors, and took a slow breath. It looked beautiful, elegant, almost too romantic for what was about to unfold. The candles flickered gently across the tables. Strings of warm lights hung like stars just above our heads. It was the kind of room that whispered, "You are loved." And that was the irony. It was perfect. Just like he always said I was. I adjusted the neckline of my dress, straightened a few place settings, and waited. The playlist was low, jazzy, familiar. One of the few things he and I actually agreed on. The bartender nodded at me, ready. The photographer I'd hired, under the pretense of capturing a romantic night, set up by the far wall. And then, the door opened. The first guest arrived. I smiled, soft and measured, and greeted her with a glass of champagne. She looked nervous. Her eyes darted around the room. I touched her arm and said, "You're not alone." One by one, they came. All of them different. All of them beautiful in their own way, and all of them carrying the same quiet tension in their eyes. Some wore pain like perfume, subtle but unmistakable. Others held their heads high, already burning with quiet fury. They didn't speak. Not yet. But their silence filled the room like smoke. They looked at each other, uncertain, trying to make sense of the pattern. Some were shocked. Some just nodded, like a puzzle finally falling into place. It was a strange kind of beauty, watching these women, once strangers, now orbiting the same betrayal. I kept my movements calm, deliberate. I offered smiles, filled glasses, and made light conversation when needed. But inside, my heart was steady like a drum. Not fast, not frantic, just firm. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I had dreamed of this moment in every possible version. And now that it was real, it felt even more powerful than I'd imagined. There was this moment, just before the final guests arrived, where everything felt suspended. The room glowed. Soft jazz curled through the air like smoke. Laughter flickered nervously from a few corners, unsure and brief. Some of the women began to sense what was happening, that they weren't the only one. I watched the realization settle in, slow and sobering. They looked at each other with cautious recognition. Not quite friends, not yet, but connected by something sharp and silent. And through it all, I kept pouring champagne, smiling, making sure everything appeared effortless. I moved like a hostess at a wedding reception, not a woman about to tear her relationship apart in front of a crowd. Maybe it was the control that calmed me. Or maybe I'd already mourned everything I was about to destroy. Either way, I felt powerful, present, composed. I had created this world, and in it, the truth was about to bloom like fire. I walked to the far side of the room, near the entrance, just as the final few women stepped in. There must have been nearly a dozen now. A dozen lives tangled by the same lie. One woman stood by the bar, arms crossed, scanning the room like a detective. Another wiped her eyes quickly, as if trying not to let the tears ruin her lipstick. And yet, when our eyes met, she gave me the smallest nod, like she understood, like she was ready. That meant everything. There was something sacred in the silence. Not forced, not awkward, just charged. The way a room feels before a storm breaks. Every one of them knew something was about to happen, but no one pushed. They honored my request. No one asked where Daniel was. No one demanded answers. They just waited, dressed in their own versions of elegance, with secrets layered under their sleeves. I watched them and thought, this is what strength looks like. quiet, collected, unbreakable. Then the music shifted. A new song came on, the one Daniel loved, the one he always said reminded him of me. I glanced at my watch. Almost time. My fingers curled around the stem of my glass as I turned back toward the crowd. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. I just smiled, because I knew. Any second now, the door would open, and Daniel would walk into a room full of women who had every reason to never see him again. And they'd all be staring at him. The door opened, and for a heartbeat, the world went quiet. Then, surprise! Everyone shouted in unison, just as we'd rehearsed in silence. I was standing dead center, glass raised, smile perfectly measured. Daniel walked in, caught completely off guard, grinning like a man who thought he was adored. He looked around, soaking in the applause, clearly thinking I'd outdone myself. And I had. Just not in the way he expected. At first, he didn't notice. His eyes swept the room casually, searching for familiar faces. And then, pause. A tiny glitch in his expression. His mouth hesitated mid-smile. His brow furrowed, almost imperceptibly. His gaze bounced from one woman to another, the puzzle forming in real time. The barista from his harmless coffee chats, the woman from his late-night work calls. The weekend fling, he said, was just a misunderstanding. All here, all staring at him, and none of them smiling. He blinked fast, like trying to clear a fog. His charm faltered. The easy confidence that usually held him upright began to crack at the edges. "What?" He started, but the word didn't land. His voice trailed off into a silence that felt volcanic. Every woman stood still, waiting, not for answers, but for me. This was my cue. I stepped forward, heels clicking against the floor like punctuation, and raised my glass a little higher. "You told me I was the only one," I said, steady and clear. "So I brought the others." The words hit him like glass shattering in slow motion. He looked around again, this time not to admire, but to assess. Panic flickered in his eyes. His mouth opened, then closed. He took a step back, as if that might erase the room he'd just walked into. But there was no exit here. Not from this. One woman crossed her arms, another raised an eyebrow, daring him to lie again. And then, as if perfectly timed, a third, calm, composed, threw her drink in his face. He gasped, blinking away the wine dripping from his lashes. Laughter burst out from somewhere near the back, sharp, cathartic. I didn't laugh. I just watched, because I'd already seen this moment in my mind so many times. He spun, stunned, caught in a web of faces that used to adore him, now burning with betrayal. One woman slapped him, not hard, not loud, but with surgical precision. Another muttered, "Liar," like a curse under her breath. He didn't speak. He couldn't. What was there left to say? I stood my ground. Let the chaos settle. Let the silence afterward weigh on him like truth finally has teeth. "Happy birthday, Daniel," I said softly, almost kindly. "You earned every single guest." His hands trembled as he looked at me, maybe searching for the version of me he thought would never do this. But she was gone. What he saw now was the woman he made when he chose to gamble people like cards, and tonight, I was the dealer. He tried. Of course he did. Tried to speak, to explain, to salvage some scrap of dignity. "Maya, this isn't what it looks like." His voice cracked, thin and brittle. I tilted my head, studying him like a stranger, because that's what he was now. A stranger who wore the face of the man I once loved, but none of the substance. "You don't get to rewrite the story now," I said, my voice low, unwavering. "Not when every chapter has witnesses." One woman laughed then, short and sharp. Another whispered, "He said the same thing to me." Someone pulled out their phone, not to record, but to read. Messages, receipts, screenshots. I didn't even need to lift a finger. The room was speaking now. My part was done. I had simply lit the match. The fire, his own making, was burning beautifully. He was surrounded not by enemies, but by truths he could no longer bend. It was justice, not vengeance. And it was breathtaking. I walked slowly to him, handed him a small white envelope, and said nothing. He didn't open it. Not yet. His hands were still shaking. I gave him a smile, not cruel, just final, and turned toward the women. "Thank you all for coming," I said, voice clear and warm. And then I walked out. No dramatic pause, no turning back. Just the sound of heels against polished wood, the quiet hum of exposed lies filling the air behind me, and a room full of women who finally knew they weren't alone. The air outside felt different. Cleaner, lighter, like I'd walked out of someone else's storm and into my own sky. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I just walked, letting the weight of it all slide off my shoulders with each step. For so long, I thought closure came in conversations, in apologies, in carefully chosen words. But now I know. Closure is silence. Closure is walking away without needing permission. And that night, I gave myself that gift. I knew what was in the envelope I handed him. A goodbye letter. Not emotional, not bitter, just honest. A few sentences that said everything I needed to say, and nothing more. My lawyer's number because yes, I was done. And a list of names, every woman I found, even the ones he probably forgot. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I just wanted him to see, in black and white, what he thought he'd never be held accountable for. His secrets had names, and I invited every single one. I didn't need to stay to watch it unravel. That part was never for me. The power wasn't in his reaction. It was in my exit. As I got in the car, I glanced back once, just to take in the image of that glowing venue behind me, the one I turned into a stage. I could almost hear the low murmurs of voices inside, feel the ripple effect starting. No more lies, no more pretending, just a woman who decided to stop breaking herself to protect a man who broke her. The days that followed were strangely quiet. No calls from him, no desperate apologies, just silence. Maybe he was still processing. Maybe he finally realized that charm has a shelf life. Either way, I didn't wait around. I filled the silence with things that made me feel like myself again. Mornings with strong coffee, walks without checking my phone, dinners where I actually tasted the food. It's wild how quickly peace returns when you stop making space for chaos. People started hearing about what happened. First whispers, then full retellings, some dramatic, some hilarious. I didn't try to control the narrative. Let them talk, let the story evolve. I wasn't ashamed. If anything, I felt seen. Some called it petty, others called it iconic. A few women even reached out, strangers, just to say thank you. "I wish I had the guts," one of them wrote. But it wasn't about guts. It was about truth, and deciding once and for all that I deserved to live in it. One afternoon, I sat at brunch with a friend, laughing over eggs and mimosas when my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen like a ghost refusing to leave. I didn't hesitate. I didn't open it. I didn't even wonder what it said. I just blocked the number, set the phone down, and raised my glass. My friend asked, "Was that him?" I smiled. Not anymore. That was the moment I knew. I hadn't just exposed a man. I'd reclaimed a life. Sometimes I wonder what he tells people now. If he spins it into a sob story, makes himself the victim, says I overreacted. Maybe he calls me crazy, the classic fallback. I don't care. That's the beauty of truth. It doesn't need defending. It just stands there, tall and quiet, while the lies crumble around it. And in the end, it wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about refusing to stay small just to keep someone else comfortable. I didn't want closure wrapped in tears or one last dramatic fight. I wanted freedom. The kind you feel in your bones when you realize you're not waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for answers, not for him to finally treat you right. I had waited long enough, and the woman who walked out of that party wasn't the same one who planned it. She was bolder, quieter, stronger in ways that don't need to be loud. She was done surviving. She was choosing to live. As I lifted my mimosa to my lips that morning, sunlight hitting my skin, laughter buzzing all around me, I felt it. Peace. Like a deep breath held too long finally released. He collected secrets. Hid them in texts and hotel rooms and half-truths. But I invited every secret to dinner, poured them a drink, and watched them become light. And when he finally reached out, I didn't answer. I blocked him and toasted to my own damn freedom.
Door slammed open, so hard it hit the wall behind it. My heart jumped, jolted out of sleep by the sound of my parents storming into my room like they were raiding a criminal den. My mother's voice sliced through the air first. How dare you deny your brother 7.5 thousand Brazilian reals? My father wasn't far behind, pointing an accusing finger at me like I was some thief. You selfish girl. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. I sat up slowly, dazed, trying to understand what was happening. I wasn't dreaming, was I? The clock confirmed the time, but everything else felt unreal. My mother was crying, not the soft, broken kind of crying. It was that loud, performative wailing she used when she wanted attention or sympathy. And my father? He was red with fury. I blinked, still groggy. What are you talking about? They didn't answer. Instead, my mother went straight to my closet and started yanking out my clothes, throwing them into a suitcase. Take your things and go away, she screamed, not even looking at me. You don't deserve to be in this house anymore. And that's when I laughed. I couldn't help it. It wasn't a joyful laugh or a mocking one. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when your brain short-circuits from too much shock and pain at once. They paused, just for a second, as if they couldn't believe I was laughing. I stood up calmly. My bare feet touched the cold floor, but inside I was burning. My parents had barged into my room before, usually over some imagined offense, but this was new. Being thrown out because I wouldn't hand over 7.5 thousand Brazilian reals to my brother, money I had earned, saved, and protected, felt like the final slap in the face I didn't know I was waiting for. I looked at them. My mother was now clenching one of my jackets in her fist like it had personally insulted her. My father looked ready to throw my laptop out the window. That's when I realized this wasn't about money. This was about control, about entitlement. I could feel my lip tremble, but I didn't let a tear fall. Not this time. You really think I owe him that? I asked softly. You owe this family everything, my dad barked. He's your brother. You're supposed to help him. But I wasn't going to beg. Not anymore. Let them pack my things. Let them scream. I wasn't scared. Not today. Because I had a secret, and they were about to learn who really had the power in this house. I've always known my place in the family. Daniel was the son, bright, adored, and constantly praised. And I was the shadow that learned how to shrink, just enough not to be in his way. Growing up, it was subtle at first. He'd get an A on a test, and my mom would throw a little party, balloons, cake, the whole thing. I once got straight A's for an entire year, and all I got was a pat on the back and a, well, that's what we expect from you. That line stayed with me. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it was the first time I realized expectations for me weren't the same as love. They were duties I didn't ask for. Daniel failed a math class? He must be stressed. I got A/B once and was asked if I was losing focus. He could sleep in, skip chores, break curfew. Every mistake he made was just a phase. Every move I made had to be perfect, or it was an embarrassment. I was the reliable one, which is just code for, you're not allowed to mess up. And when things got tough financially, guess who they came to? Me. Not the son they pampered and praised, me. I was still in college when they first asked for help with bills. I drained my savings, thinking maybe that would finally earn me some appreciation. Instead, it became expected. Like, of course Emily will fix everything. She always does. Daniel, on the other hand, would waltz in with his latest failed business idea, and they'd smile like he was Elon Musk. They co-signed loans for him, bailed him out when he messed up emotionally, financially, legally. But when I asked for help covering tuition one semester, I got a long talk about independence and not being a burden. I started to see the pattern more clearly as I got older. The more I gave, the more invisible I became. And Daniel, he could do no wrong, even when he was clearly wrong. Like the time he borrowed my car without asking and crashed it? They didn't get mad at him. They asked me why I hadn't gotten better insurance. So when that morning came, when they burst into my room yelling about how dare I deny Daniel money, I wasn't shocked by the favoritism, but I was done with it. They raised me to serve him, not to be seen. But I had started to see myself, and I was done shrinking. Manipulation doesn't always look like yelling or threats. Sometimes it sounds like, "You're the only one we can count on, Emily." Or, "He's your brother, he needs you." And for years I believed them. It started small. Gas money here, a loan there. My mom would call, voice trembling. "Your father's blood pressure is high again. Daniel lost his job. Can you help us cover the mortgage this month?" And of course I did. I always did. Because somewhere deep inside I thought if I gave enough, loved enough, they'd finally see me. But the bar kept moving. I was working 2 jobs and still sending money home while Daniel quit his 3rd startup in 6 months and took a vacation to Rio. I'd call my parents, voice cracking from exhaustion, and they'd say things like, "We know it's hard, sweetheart, but Daniel is going through a tough time." Tough time? He was partying while I skipped meals to keep up with bills. It wasn't just the money. Emotionally, I was the family dumping ground. Every crisis came to me. My mom crying about Daniel's gambling debts? I listened. My dad raging about another loan default? I soothed. I became their therapist, banker, emotional sponge, all while being told how lucky I was that I wasn't the one with problems. But the worst part? Whenever things spiraled, when Daniel crashed another car, or when my parents defaulted on a loan they took for him, they'd look at me like I was the failure, as if I hadn't done enough, as if I should have predicted his next mess and stopped it before it happened. There was a year when I paid off one of Daniel's debts, $3,000 he owed to some sketchy lender. I didn't have that kind of money lying around. I took out a credit card I couldn't afford. When I told my mom about the interest piling up, she sighed and said, "You shouldn't make us feel guilty, Emily. You did it out of love, didn't you?" That line burned, because they did make me feel guilty. Constantly. And every time I tried to pull away, even a little, they'd bring out the big guns. Family sticks together. You're not like your brother. Don't be selfish. But I wasn't selfish. I was being drained. Slowly, painfully by the people who were supposed to protect me. And Daniel, he walked around like a king, knowing I'd clean up his messes. He never said thank you. Never apologized. If anything, he seemed annoyed when I didn't hand over money fast enough. Looking back, I don't know how I lasted as long as I did. But those years, they wore me down, until one day I couldn't do it anymore. The message came late, just as I was winding down from a long day at work. My phone buzzed. It was my mother, for words that made my stomach drop. "Your brother needs help." I didn't even have to open the text to know what was coming. Still I did. And there it was. Daniel got into some trouble. Gambling again. "We need $7,500. Just for now." I froze. $7,500. That wasn't pocket change. That was my entire savings. The money I'd scraped together over 2 exhausting years, juggling 2 jobs, living off ramen, cutting corners just to finally afford my own apartment. A safe space. A dream I had built piece by piece. And they wanted me to throw it away again. For him. The same brother who had blown through 3 jobs, maxed out credit cards, wrecked a borrowed car, and yet still got a standing ovation every time he walked into the house. He was the golden son, after all. No matter how many times he messed up, there was always another excuse, another bailout, another, "He just needs support." But me? I was the one they leaned on. The dependable one. The fixer. The one who didn't ask for much, which meant they gave even less. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Then I typed a word I'd never dared say before. No. Just that. No apology. No softening. Just no. I turned off my phone, crawled into bed, and for the first time in my life, I felt the smallest flicker of power. I had drawn a boundary. A firm, unapologetic boundary. And it exploded in my face. At dawn, my bedroom door slammed open. I jolted awake as my parents stormed in, wild-eyed and furious like I had committed some unspeakable crime. "How dare you deny your brother?" my mother shrieked. My father was shaking with rage. "After everything we've done for you? You selfish little girl." I sat up, stunned, heart racing. "Are you serious right now?" "Pack your things," my father bellowed. "If you can't support this family, you don't belong in it." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was finally, painfully clear. I wasn't their daughter. I was their lifeline, their backup wallet, their emotional sponge. But not anymore. They didn't see it yet, but that no wasn't just a refusal. It was the beginning of the end for them, and the beginning of something new for me, something stronger. As my parents raged at me, telling me to get out of the house, something inside me clicked. I'd spent my entire life accommodating their whims, their needs, their endless demands. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd been preparing for this moment, the moment when I could finally stand on my own 2 feet, when I wouldn't be shackled to their expectations any longer. 2 years ago, I had made a decision. I had quietly begun saving, stashing away a little bit from each paycheck, all while pretending to be the obedient daughter they expected. No one knew. Not my parents, not even Daniel. I had learned the art of keeping secrets, especially the ones that would set me free. I didn't just save money, I invested it. I opened a separate bank account, one they couldn't touch, and slowly built a small fund. At first, it was for a rainy day, but over time it became my escape fund. The escape from the family who had manipulated me for so long, from the brother who never took responsibility, from the parents who only saw me as their personal resource. And then last year I did it. I bought a small house. Nothing extravagant, but it was mine. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even in a fancy neighborhood, but it was my sanctuary, my place of peace, a home where I could be myself without constantly being dragged into their drama. I signed the papers in secret, kept the documents hidden in a drawer, and never breathed a word about it to anyone. The confrontation with my parents that morning, the chaos they unleashed, only accelerated what I knew I had to do next. I had already planned for my departure. The house was ready, the money in place. And now I would finally show them that I was no longer the naive girl who would drop everything for them. When my father screamed at me to leave, I simply walked to my room and began packing my things slowly, deliberately, as if I were moving for a fresh start, not just because I was being thrown out. The house I had been renting was no longer a place of refuge. It was a prison. And as I packed, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't fear that filled me. It was certainty. I was leaving, and there was no going back. I wasn't just walking out the door. I was walking away from a lifetime of betrayal and sacrifice. They could never understand the work I'd put into building a life of my own. The late nights, the sacrifices, the countless times I had to put my own dreams on hold just to help them. None of it had been seen. None of it had been appreciated. But that was about to change. When I was done packing, I grabbed the envelope I had hidden in the back of my drawer. Inside was the deed to my new house in my name. The house I had built for myself. The house that would now be my refuge. As I walked out of that door for the last time, I felt a rush of exhilaration. This was it. The grand plan was in motion. The tension in the room was suffocating. My parents stood there, their faces red with anger, still yelling at me to pack my things and get out. I could feel their fury, like heat radiating off of them. But inside, something had shifted. No longer was I the passive, obedient daughter who lived in their shadow. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. They had taken so much from me over the years, manipulating my kindness and using it against me. And now, finally, it was my turn to take control of the situation, to show them exactly how far I had come. I calmly stood up, my movements slow, deliberate. They were so consumed with their anger, they didn't even notice the change in me. The confident, self-assured version of me that I'd spent years building was now standing in front of them. I walked over to the desk where I had placed the folder. It was simple, just a plain manila folder with one piece of paper inside. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, just a single document that would change everything. I reached down, grabbed the folder, and held it out in front of me. My heart beat a little faster, but it wasn't fear I felt. It was anticipation. They were about to realize how thoroughly I'd outgrown them. With a quiet but firm voice, I spoke. Here, take a look at this. They hesitated for a moment, clearly confused. But as soon as they saw the deed in my hands, their faces twisted in disbelief. I could see the gears turning in their heads as they processed the reality of what I was handing them. Their entitled rage slowly turned into something else, panic. My mother snatched the document from my hands, her eyes scanning it quickly, desperately looking for a mistake. But there was none. It was all there in black and white. The house they had been living in for years, the one they thought was mine by virtue of their position in my life, was actually in my name. I don't understand, my father stammered. His face had drained of color. His once confident, authoritative presence now seemed weak and frail. This can't be right. I let you stay here, I said quietly, watching their confusion morph into sheer panic. Out of kindness, I thought it was the right thing to do. But this house, this life you've taken for granted, it's mine, not yours. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence between us was thick, oppressive. I could almost hear the panic rising in their minds as they tried to grasp what I had just revealed. It was like a rug had been pulled out from under them. Their comfortable world, the one they had built on my sacrifices, was crumbling. Emily, you don't understand, my mother pleaded, her voice trembling. But there was no sincerity in her tone, only fear. Fear of losing everything they had taken for granted. I shook my head, finally allowing myself to smile. Oh, I understand perfectly. The roles had reversed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one begging for approval, for love, for recognition. I had the power now. The tables had turned, and I was finally free. I stood there, watching as the panic spread across their faces. They had thought they could control me forever, manipulate me into giving, sacrificing, bending to their will. But now I had the upper hand. And this time it was my turn to call the shots. The room was alive with chaos. My parents, who had once been the pillars of this so-called family, were crumbling before my eyes. My mother's face was twisted with panic, her hands trembling as she clutched the deed to the house. My father, usually the one who held the reins, now stood there speechless, his face a mask of disbelief. The balance of power had shifted, and they didn't know how to handle it. Emily, please, my mother begged, her voice faltering. You can't do this. You don't understand how hard things are right now. Your brother, he's made some mistakes, but we're a family. You have to help us. Her words felt like knives in my chest, but I didn't let them show. I had heard those same pleas for years, every time my brother messed up, every time they came to me for help. They always expected me to be the one to fix everything, to clean up the messes they couldn't bear to confront. But not anymore. I was done. No, I said, my voice steady but firm. I'm not helping anymore. You've had your chance. I'm not your backup plan anymore. Her face contorted in frustration, then anger, as if she couldn't quite grasp what was happening. How can you be so cold? She spat, her words sharp, meant to hurt. After everything we've done for you, after all we've sacrificed. I laughed bitterly. Sacrifice? You mean you used me, manipulated me into being your safety net while you let him run wild. You let him destroy everything, and I was the one who had to pay the price. My father, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. This is ridiculous, Emily. You've gone too far. You think you're some big shot now that you've bought a house? You're still our daughter. Don't forget that. I looked him in the eye. No, you've forgotten who I am. You think I'm just supposed to bend to your will because you're my parents, but I'm not a doormat anymore. Their faces were now a blend of fury and desperation. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I could see the anger beneath it. She was no longer the woman I had once looked up to, the one who promised me that family always comes first. Now, all I saw was a person who was losing control, someone who had exploited my loyalty for years. And then, like a final twist of the knife, my brother burst through the door. His face was flush, his hair unkempt, his eyes darting nervously between the three of us. The sight of him made my stomach turn. He had no idea what was coming. He never did. "What's going on?" he asked, sounding more like a child than a grown man. "Why is everyone yelling?" I didn't even bother to answer him. I just pointed at him, my voice cold. You're the reason all of this is falling apart." His face twisted in confusion, but I could see a flicker of guilt in his eyes. He was finally realizing that the shield he had relied on for so long, his parents' protection, my silent support, was gone. And now, all of his bad decisions, all of his irresponsibility were coming to light. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his words trailing off, unable to defend himself. I could see the cracks in the facade now. The golden family image they had tried to maintain for so long was crumbling, piece by piece. It was no longer about helping each other or staying united. It was about survival, and for once, I wasn't going to be the one who sacrificed everything for their mistakes. My parents turned on each other, blaming each other for their son's failures. My father's voice rose in accusation. "You always protected him. You let him do whatever he wanted. Now look at the mess we're in." My mother's eyes flashed with rage, and she shot back. "Don't pretend you didn't encourage him. You always thought he was perfect, and now look where we are." I stood back and watched. For the first time, I wasn't caught up in the chaos. I wasn't part of the storm. I was watching it from the outside, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The weight that had been on my shoulders for years was lifting piece by piece. This was the fallout of their actions. Their perfect image, their golden family, was nothing more than a carefully crafted lie. And as they turned on each other, I realized something that I had never fully understood before. I was free. I was finally free of them and the toxic family dynamic they had forced me into. They were unraveling, and I was no longer tangled in their mess. As I stood there, watching the chaos unfold before me, a strange sense of calm washed over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fix things for everyone else. I wasn't tangled in their drama, their mistakes, or their guilt. I wasn't holding myself to the impossible standards they had set for me. I was standing on my own, finally free. The house felt different now. The once familiar walls that had held all the weight of my family's expectations now seemed hollow, devoid of any power over me. I could breathe again, and as much as I had loved them once, as much as I had sacrificed for them, I knew I couldn't continue living like that. The years of being the invisible daughter, the one who was expected to be quiet, to give, to help, had left their mark. But now, I was beginning to see myself clearly. I had always been there for them, always, but I had never been there for myself. I had lived my life through their eyes, measured my worth by their approval, and it had drained me. No more. I looked at the mess in front of me, the broken family, the accusations, the guilt, the anger. It wasn't mine to fix anymore. It wasn't my responsibility to bear the weight of their mistakes. They had taught me that love and loyalty meant sacrificing yourself. But I had learned, finally, that love doesn't come at the cost of your peace. And I was done sacrificing. My mother was still crying, my father still pacing, my brother retreating into the corner, defeated. They could beg, scream, guilt-trip me, but I wasn't the same person I used to be. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had given up too much of myself for too long, and now I was taking it all back. I walked out of the room without another word. The house that I had once called home no longer felt like mine. My home was where I chose to make it, and for the first time I realized I didn't have to stay trapped in the cycle they had built for me. I could go anywhere, do anything. I had worked hard for my independence, and now I was going to live it. I spent the next few weeks settling into my new house, slowly but surely. The space was quiet, peaceful. No yelling, no manipulation, no expectations, just me, my dreams, and my future. It was everything I had been yearning for, and I had built it on my own terms. And as the days passed, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I didn't need to hold on to the resentment that had followed me for so long. I had freed myself from the weight of their demands. It was time to protect my peace, to nourish the woman I had become. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love if it came with strings attached. I had learned to love myself, to finally see my worth. And as I looked in the mirror, I saw someone strong, someone capable, someone who deserved to live for herself, not for anyone else. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, not by them, but by me. And that was enough. There's on a card reading, Dad's 50th birthday celebration. The golden script was a stark contrast to the bitterness in her chest. 473 kilometers. That was how far she would have to drive, a distance that, in more ways than one, felt insurmountable. For years, her relationship with her father had been fractured. He had always played favorites, and for as long as Lily could remember, she had never been the one to receive his praise or approval. He had always made her feel like she was the afterthought, the one who had to work twice as hard to earn half the recognition. Yet, despite it all, the invitation still lay there, waiting for her decision. Her brother, the golden child, was the one who had always received the most attention. He was the one who could do no wrong. Lily had grown up watching her father shower him with praise, as if he were the only one worth his time. And yet, here she was, holding an invitation to her father's birthday, asking her to celebrate his milestone, a celebration where she had always felt like an outsider. She paused for a moment, the weight of her emotions pulling her in two different directions. On one hand, there was resentment, so much of it built up over years of neglect and favoritism. It burned inside her, a constant reminder of all the times she had been overlooked in favor of her brother. It was almost laughable how much she had sacrificed for a family that seemed to take her for granted. And then there was hope. A part of Lily still clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, this birthday could be different. Maybe her father had finally realized how much she had done for the family. Maybe this was her chance to show up and make him proud, something she had never gotten before. With a sigh, Lily stood up, grabbing her coat and keys. The drive would be long, but she wasn't about to let her father think she would never show up. For all the pain they'd caused her, she would go. After all, family was family. Or so she tried to convince herself. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was determined to face whatever awaited her at the end. As Lily drove through the winding roads, her mind drifted back to her childhood, a time that seemed both distant and painfully vivid. The house, with its familiar smell of baked bread and the creak of the old wooden stairs, was the setting of her early memories. But it wasn't the house that defined her upbringing, it was the atmosphere inside it. An invisible, ever-present weight, one that pushed her to always prove herself, while her brother effortlessly cruised through life with an unearned sense of entitlement. Her father had always adored him. Alex, the golden child, with his boyish charm and innocent smile. He could do no wrong in their father's eyes. When he failed a test, it was brushed off with a laugh and a pat on the back. "You'll do better next time," their father would say. When he broke something, it was just an accident. If he disappointed anyone, it was always someone else's fault. The world seemed to revolve around him, and Lily? Well, she was just there, quiet, doing her part, trying to fit into a mold that was never made for her. Her hard work went unnoticed. All the late nights spent studying, the extra chores she took on, the sacrifices she made so her brother could have more freedom, they were invisible to her father. She never got the well done or the "I'm proud of you" that Alex seemed to receive effortlessly. Instead, she was always told to keep going or just try harder. Her accomplishments, whether academic or personal, were always overshadowed by Alex's failures, which somehow didn't matter as much. It was as though the praise was reserved exclusively for him, and all Lily could do was watch. She remembered one particular moment that crystallized her role in the family. It was her high school graduation. She had worked so hard for it, studying late into the night, taking extra classes to make sure she could succeed. When the day arrived, she had hoped to hear those words from her father that she had longed for. "I'm proud of you." But when she looked to him, hoping for recognition, he was more focused on Alex, who was joking around with his friends. Lily's heart sank as she realized that despite everything she had done, despite how much she had pushed herself, she was just another person in the background. Meanwhile, Alex had struggled. He was rebellious, skipping classes, staying out late, and getting into trouble. Yet, no matter what he did, it was always excused, always brushed under the rug. "He's just being a teenager," their father would say, a knowing smile on his face. But Lily? Lily was expected to be the perfect daughter, the one who never made mistakes. Her imperfections were met with disappointment, while Alex's were met with understanding. The more Lily tried to earn her father's approval, the more she realized it was a game she could never win. He had already made up his mind. He was proud of Alex, and no matter how hard she tried, she would always be the one who had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. It was moments like these that had built up the bitterness in her heart. But even more than that, it had set the foundation for the deep emotional conflict she felt now. Lily wasn't just resentful of her father's favoritism. She was devastated by it. The dining room was filled with the rich scent of roasted meat and the hum of polite conversation. Family and friends gathered around the table, laughing and sharing stories of years gone by. But Lily felt as though she were in another world, separate, detached from the warmth and camaraderie of those around her. Her eyes flickered to her father, sitting at the head of the table, a smile plastered on his face as he greeted everyone with exaggerated enthusiasm. She had traveled 473 kilometers to be there, but right now, it didn't feel like the home she remembered. The walls, once familiar and safe, now seemed cold and distant. Alex, her brother, was laughing with their cousins, making jokes, as usual, his carefree nature earning him all the attention. Her parents exchanged glances with one another, smiles never wavering, as though everything was perfect. Lily, however, couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. She was there because she thought, no, hoped, that this birthday dinner could be a turning point. She had hoped her father's words would be different this time. Maybe, just maybe, he would say something about her hard work, about her effort to be there despite everything. But deep down, she knew that wasn't going to happen. As the dinner continued, her father stood up to make a toast, his glass raised high. The room fell silent in anticipation. Lily's heart fluttered nervously as she braced herself for the familiar words. "I'm proud of all my children," he began, his voice steady and warm. Lily smiled faintly, her stomach tightening with a mixture of hope and doubt. Maybe this time, this would be the moment. Maybe he'd finally acknowledge her. But then, as the silence stretched on, her father's words took a sharp turn. "Except for one," he continued, his voice casual, as though he were merely making an offhand comment. He glanced over at her, and for a brief second their eyes locked. The air seemed to crackle with tension. The weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. Except for one. Those words stung like a slap in the face. The laughter around the table continued, but to Lily it felt like a distant echo, far away from the crushing reality of what had just been said. Her heart pounded in her ears, but she didn't dare react. She could feel her mother's eyes on her, a look of pity mingled with guilt flashing briefly before she quickly turned her gaze away. Lily wanted to disappear. She wanted to walk out of the room, to leave and never come back. But she didn't. She stayed. She stood there, clutching her glass in trembling fingers, and smiled, a smile so forced it hurt her face. Inside, her emotions raged. Every ounce of resentment she had been holding back boiled over, but she kept it locked inside. Why did he do this? Why now? She had hoped for a sign of acknowledgement, a simple acknowledgement that she mattered. But instead, she had been reduced to nothing more than an afterthought, a mistake he wasn't willing to own. She forced herself to sip her champagne, trying to swallow the bitterness that had risen in her throat. She laughed, but it wasn't a laugh, it was hollow, empty. The irony of it all didn't escape her. Her father was proud of every child at the table except her. She had given up so much for this family, but none of it had ever been enough. Her father's toast hung in the air, and Lily's eyes flickered to Alex, who had no idea what his words had done to her. He was too caught up in his own world to notice. But Lily wasn't a child anymore, not someone who would silently absorb the hurt. And as the awkward silence stretched on, she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. The laughter around her felt deafening. Each chuckle, each comment, seemed to further isolate Emily from the world she had hoped she could re-enter. The clinking of glasses, the hum of casual conversation, it all faded into a blur as her father's words echoed in her mind. Except for one. That single phrase seemed to reverberate in her head, drowning out everything else. She looked at her father, sitting at the head of the table, his face flushed from the alcohol, his smile wide and carefree as though nothing had happened. And there he was, her brother, Alex, basking in the glow of their father's approval. He was busy telling some ridiculous story, making everyone laugh, and she couldn't help but feel disgusted by the ease with which he played the part of the golden child. But it wasn't Alex who hurt her the most. It was her father, the man who had promised her the world, who had promised that family came first, that love was unconditional. And yet, time and time again, he had chosen Alex. He had chosen his mistakes, his laziness, his entitlement, over Emily's hard work, over her sacrifices, over everything she had given up for them. The years of overlooked achievements, the countless times she had been expected to drop everything for the family, all came rushing back. Every time she had been pushed aside for Alex. Every time she had been told to make way for him. The clarity hit her like a slap in the face. This will never change. Her father would never see her. Not truly. She could work herself to the bone, achieve every goal she set, and it would never be enough. He would always look at her like she was a disappointment, while Alex, no matter how many times he messed up, would always be the favorite. It was as though her worth was measured by how much she could sacrifice, how much she could endure, and how much she could give without ever asking for anything in return. In that moment, something inside Emily snapped. The little girl who had once desperately tried to earn her father's love, who had worked tirelessly to be seen, was gone. The woman sitting at that table was different. She was no longer willing to beg for scraps of love and attention. No longer willing to be the invisible daughter. A fire started to burn within her, a quiet but fierce rebellion. Emily had spent years trying to please them, trying to fit into a mold that never truly fit her. And yet, they had never truly seen her. No, it was time for her to see herself. As her father continued to boast about his perfect family, Emily felt the first real spark of freedom. Revenge wasn't about anger. It wasn't about shouting, about confronting her father in the heat of the moment. No, this was different. It was about taking control of her own life, about putting herself first for the very first time. She glanced at her father again, but this time she saw him for what he really was, a man who couldn't see beyond his own narrow view of what mattered. She saw him as the source of her pain, yes, but also as the catalyst for the change she was about to make. It was time to stop being the invisible daughter. It was time for Emily to take back what was hers, to show them just how much they had underestimated her. The pieces were falling into place. Slowly but surely she knew exactly what she had to do. And when the moment came, she would show them the cost of overlooking her. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about reclaiming her power. The dinner had continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. The laughter was still there, the clinking of glasses, the chatter, but it all felt distant, muted. Emily's mind, however, was sharp and focused, locked on what she was about to do. Her hands felt steady as she reached into her bag and carefully retrieved a small gift box. It wasn't much, just a simple, unassuming little box wrapped in soft, plain paper. But it would hold everything she needed. This wasn't about grandeur or making a scene. It wasn't about grandeur. No, it was about making a statement, one small action that would speak volumes. A quiet rebellion. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained a mask of composure. She could feel her pulse in her throat, a tightness in her chest. The room seemed to hold its breath, though no one knew what was coming. Her fingers traced the edges of the box, feeling the weight of her own resolve. It wasn't a long wait before her father raised his glass for another toast. His smug grin was back, his eyes scanning the room, watching his family with pride as he prepared to make another grand declaration. To family, he said, his voice rich and full of meaning. To everything I've worked for. And to my children, the ones who make me proud. His eyes lingered on Alex for a moment, a smile creeping across his face. Except for one, he added with a careless laugh. Emily could feel her breath catch, the familiar sting of his words, but she didn't flinch. She didn't even allow herself to feel the anger anymore. That part of her had already burned away. Instead, she smiled. The smile was not for her father, but for the moment that was about to unfold. Her hand moved slowly, almost too slowly, but her fingers didn't tremble as she dropped the small gift box into her father's champagne glass. It made no noise as it sank, only the tiniest of splashes, barely noticeable beneath the bubbly surface. No one saw it happen, at least not yet. They were too distracted by the moment, by the routine of the celebration. But Emily knew the attention would soon turn to her. She sat back in her chair, her calm expression at odds with the chaos that swirled within her. The cocktail of emotions, anger, betrayal, anticipation, now formed a quiet resolve. She would let them wonder, let them feel the tension mount. The room was filled with the chatter of polite conversations, but Emily's mind was already far ahead. She could see the moment when everything would come crashing down. It wasn't about the gift box. It wasn't about the contents inside, either. No, it was about what this small gesture represented. The tiny box, dropped without a sound, was a symbol of everything she had been denied. It was a symbol of the years she had spent working, sacrificing, bending to the will of a family who had never truly seen her. Now, she was choosing to make them see. And as her father lifted the glass to take a sip, Emily felt a rush of satisfaction. The storm within her had been building, and now it was about to break. This wasn't just a gift, it was a reckoning. The dinner had taken on a strange, almost surreal quality. Emily's mind raced, but her body remained composed, every inch of her cool as the others continued their small talk. Her father had yet to notice the small gift box floating in his glass, so wrapped up in his smug little toast that he couldn't have cared less about the tiny detail. Then it happened. He raised his glass to his lips, the delicate crystal glinting under the chandelier light. The conversation around the table ebbed, but his eyes remained locked on his own reflection in the polished surface of his glass. A little sip, a satisfied sigh, and then the change. The glass was placed down abruptly, and his face twisted in confusion. What the? He peered into the glass, as if trying to make sense of what he saw. At first, it seemed like just another mistake. Maybe the bubbles in the champagne had formed into an unusual pattern, or perhaps a piece of something had slipped in unnoticed. But no, there it was. It was a small slip of paper, caught just beneath the champagne surface and nestled beside it, something metallic, something solid. The family fell silent, eyes on him now. No one spoke, unsure of what was going on. Emily watched, her smile now completely absent from her face. She was not concerned. This was the moment. The silence at the table felt like it lasted a lifetime as her father's mind worked to piece together the puzzle. Then, with a sense of disbelief and rising panic, her father fumbled for the contents at the bottom of his glass. He reached down and pulled out the small, delicate piece of paper first, crumpling it between his fingers as he brought it to his face. A second later, he recoiled. The object in his hand was too big to fit into the mouth of the glass easily, but after a second of awkward fumbling, he finally brought it up and out. The room gasped. In his hand was a small key, a metal tag attached to it with a tiny red ribbon. And tucked inside the crumpled piece of paper was a printed sheet with one simple line. Property of Emma Wilson. Her father's face went pale as realization crashed into him. His jaw tightened, his brow furrowing. The silence that followed was oppressive, everyone too stunned to speak. What is this? What the hell is this? He demanded, the first hint of panic in his voice. Emily stood from her chair slowly, no longer hiding her satisfaction. She could see her father's usual self-assuredness faltering, the control he always exerted over his family slipping away in front of his very eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he inspected the key and the paper, his mind racing for any explanation, any justification he could throw at her. I guess you didn't see the deed, did you? Emily's voice was calm, cutting through the tension like a knife. Her words sent a ripple of confusion and curiosity across the table. Everyone's attention was on her now, and she could feel their eyes burning into her back as she turned her gaze to her father. You see, Dad, she continued, her voice steady, that little key in your hand is the key to the house you're currently living in. That deed you're holding, that's the deed to the house that's now in my name. Her father stared at her, his mouth hanging open. His mind scrambled, trying to process what she was saying. What do you mean? Emily smiled, a hint of triumph behind her eyes. I've been planning this for 2 years. I've worked hard for everything I have. Every sacrifice I made, every penny I saved. It was all for me, for my future. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I've built my life quietly and carefully, and now I'm taking what's mine. And that includes this house. Her father's face twisted in disbelief, shock replacing the confidence that had always defined him. His hands shook as he tried to find the words to fight back, but none came. The room was deathly silent now, no one daring to breathe as Emily's revelation settled in. You see, I didn't just come here for your birthday, Dad. I came here to show you that I'm done being the invisible one, the one who's never enough in your eyes. I'm done playing your little game. The rest of the family sat frozen, unsure of how to react. Her mother's face had drained of color, her brother's smug expression now replaced with a growing unease. But it was her father who was the focal point. He had always seen himself as the one who controlled everything, but now his empire was crumbling. He finally found his voice, but it came out strained. You can't be serious. That house is mine, he shouted, the last vestiges of his authority slipping into desperation. I made you, Emma. You owe me. Emma held her ground, her eyes never leaving his. No, Dad, you don't get to decide that anymore. I owe you nothing, and it's time you learned that. The air between them crackled with tension. The entire family was staring now, waiting for the next move, but no one spoke. Emma had made her statement, and now it was up to her father to respond. The silence was deafening. The room was thick with disbelief, the silence almost suffocating. Her father's shock morphed into rage, the sudden eruption shattering the fragile calm. His hands, still trembling from the shock of the key and the deed, slammed against the table. The clinking of his glass against the surface was drowned out by the anger in his voice. Are you out of your mind? He bellowed, his face contorted in fury. How dare you do this to me? To your family? After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By taking what's mine. Emily stood her ground, her posture calm and unshaken. The fury in his eyes, the indignation in his voice. It was almost predictable. She had seen this kind of reaction before, when he would berate her for the smallest mistakes or when he'd belittle her accomplishments. But this was different. This was her taking control of her life. Dad, she said softly, the calmness of her voice almost unnerving in the face of his fury. This house was never yours. It was always mine. You just never noticed. Her father's face twisted further, and he shot a glance at her mother, as if pleading for her support. But her mother, standing by the wall, looked too stunned to speak. She had always been the one to play the mediator, the one to try and smooth things over. But now, her gaze was fixed on her husband with an unreadable expression, her lips trembling. Emily could feel the distance between them widening with every word. Her brother, who had been sitting at the far end of the table, suddenly found his voice. This is crazy, Emma. You're being selfish. You've always been so dramatic. What's wrong with just helping Dad out? Why do you have to make everything about you? His voice was desperate, the panic in his tone evident. Dramatic? Emily raised an eyebrow, the edge in her voice sharp as a knife. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being realistic. I've spent my entire life being overlooked, being told that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't matter. And all for what? So that you can keep using me? No. I'm done. Her brother opened his mouth to argue again, but this time Emily didn't let him speak. You don't get to keep using me anymore, she added firmly. None of you do. I've been silent for far too long, but I'm done playing that game. This house, the life I've built, it's mine. You can't take that from me. The room was divided now, the superficial unity that her family had always shown cracking open like a fragile shell. The same family who had presented themselves as perfect, as the ideal unit, was now unraveling before their eyes. Her father's outburst was no longer about the house. It was about losing control, about realizing that he had never truly appreciated what she had given, what he had lost. Why did you even come here, then? Her father hissed, the venom in his words sharp enough to cut. Was this all just for some kind of payback? To rub it in my face? Emily didn't flinch. I didn't come for payback. I came because I was tired of being invisible. I came because I wanted you to see me for the first time in my life. And now that you do, I'm not going anywhere. I've made my peace. The shock in her father's eyes turned into something else. Was it guilt? Or was it just regret? Either way, Emily didn't care. It was too late now. She had taken the power back. Her siblings' reactions were mixed, some sitting in stunned silence, others attempting weakly to defend their father. Her brother shot her a glare, his frustration and anger bubbling over. But even he couldn't find the words to argue anymore. The family that had once prided itself on maintaining a perfect image, a facade of unity, was falling apart. Emily watched as her father's anger turned to confusion, as her brother's attempts to salvage the situation only deepened the rift between them all. She was no longer the child who sat at the table, waiting for a scrap of recognition. Now, she stood at the center of the chaos, a force to be reckoned with. As her family crumbled under the weight of their own lies, Emily knew that this moment, this transformation, was hers alone. The power had shifted. No one could take it back. And she wasn't going to apologize for it. In that moment, the image of the perfect family, the one they had spent so long trying to protect, was shattered forever. The chaos of that night slowly faded into the background as Emily sat in her car, watching her family's house shrink into the distance in her rearview mirror. The initial surge of anger and triumph had settled, leaving behind an unexpected sense of calm. She had done it. She had taken back her power in a way she never thought possible. But now, for the first time in years, she felt free. For so long, her identity had been defined by her family's expectations, by their failures, and by her own desperate need to prove herself to people who would never truly see her. But not anymore. That chapter of her life had closed, and Emily was no longer tethered to the ghosts of the past. The facade her family had worked so hard to maintain was shattered beyond repair, and she wasn't going to be a part of it anymore. As she drove further away, she reflected on everything that had led her to this moment. The years of sacrifice, the ignored dreams, the constant feeling of never being enough. She realized that even if she had been invisible in their eyes for all those years, she had always been enough in her own. The real victory wasn't just what she had done at the dinner table. It was the realization that her worth had never depended on anyone else's validation. Emily had finally made the choice to take care of herself. She had spent too many years focused on trying to meet the needs of a family who never cared to meet hers. The constant back and forth, the guilt, the feeling of being forever overlooked, it was exhausting. But now, she had learned that her peace was worth more than their approval. She made her way to the small house she had purchased months ago, the place that had been a secret, a symbol of her newfound independence. The house wasn't anything extravagant, but to her it was a home. It was hers in every sense of the word. It was where she could be herself, where she could heal, and where she could finally live life on her own terms. When Emily stepped inside, she felt a deep sense of relief wash over her. There was no one here to judge her, to tell her she wasn't enough. There was no more pretending, no more bending to fit into a role that had never truly belonged to her. The walls of her new home weren't just a barrier between her and the outside world. They were sanctuary. She had built this life, one that was free of the toxicity that had surrounded her for so long. Emily sat on the couch, her thoughts settling into a quiet calm. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of closure. The revenge she had exacted had given her the space to reclaim herself, but now it was time to let go of the bitterness. She didn't need to carry that weight any longer. The family she had once dreamed of being a part of wasn't the family she had chosen to become. And in letting go, she could finally move forward. She smiled softly, her eyes closing as she leaned back. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years, Emily felt ready to embrace it. She wasn't the girl who had to prove herself anymore. She was the woman who had learned to stand up for herself, and that was enough. She was finally free,